Hello, good evening, and you're very welcome to the Royal College of Surgeons here in Dublin. I'm Dr Ciara Kelly, and this evening we're going to be discussing the role of nutrition and exercise on human health. This is the first part in a three-part series on positive health and lifestyle medicine, and is part of the RCSI's overall series MyHealth of public lectures. That series aims to empower and engage people to make informed and good decisions about their own health, and it interacts with top experts, practitioners and researchers in the area of positive health. Tonight the speakers around the table are Professor Suzanne McDonough, and she is the head of the RCSI's School of Physiotherapy, Professor Robert Kelly, who is a senior lecturer in medicine in the RCSI and a consultant cardiologist, and Professor Kieran O'Boyle, who is director of the newly established RCSI Centre of Positive Psychology and Health, to discuss the subject in more detail. You're welcome to the RCSI's MyHealth series. I might come to you first, Kieran, if you don't mind. We hear a huge amount when we talk about positive health and lifestyle medicine about the importance of nutrition, the importance of exercise, but getting your mind into the right frame of mind, the positive psychology that needs to underpin, I suppose, the ability to embrace change maybe towards your health. How important is that?
I think it's extremely important, Ciara, and I think the shift in emphasis is taking place from a kind of a traditional model of medicine where we have the capacity to treat people when they're sick, either to cure them or to maximize their quality of life with chronic illness. But that's not sustainable in the longer term with the growth of populations and so on. So I think what we need to do is to empower people to take much more control over their own health and essentially prevent illness from happening. And I think there's a great deal that people can do, as we'll hear from Robert and Suzanne. But motivation is a really key part of that. And I think it can be very challenging for people having busy lives, to motivate themselves, trying to deal with all the other stresses and strains. But the evidence is increasingly clear that it is extremely important that people do that.
Okay. I imagine if you're on that train, if you're someone who exercises and eats healthily, then it's okay. But if you're somebody from the outside looking in and maybe you're carrying extra weight, or maybe you're very sedentary, or maybe you don't cook, you eat processed food all the time, you've no experience of maybe cooking or even thinking in that way. If you wanted to intervene at that point with somebody who health is like a foreign country to them, if it were, what would you do as a first step?
Well, the first step is to find out where somebody is at, I think, and what's driving their behaviours. And, Robert does this clinically all the time. So I think it has to be fitted to where the person themselves are at. There's no point in lecturing at people about So we know that knowledge per se, knowledge in and of itself isn't sufficient. So I know that smoking is bad for me, for example. A person still smokes, or I know that alcohol is not great for me. People still drink. So there's more to it than just knowing. I think people have to be ready, to make the changes. So the more that we can help people to understand the importance of these changes, I think that's really key to this. I think for ourselves, being RCSI, it's really important for us that everything that we say is evidence-based, so we can go and find the science and we can say, well, there's proof that this exists. Because when I look around me out in the wider world, there's an awful lot of really strange stuff out there that people are being advised to do.
There is, and that would be very particularly, I would suggest, Robert, in the area of nutrition. A huge amount of people get their information now on nutrition from the internet, from Instagram, from Google, from anecdotes they've read on Facebook, and the misinformation is enormous. If you could boil down the quality, I suppose, information on nutrition and what people should be doing, what would you say that the big pillars of healthy eating, healthy nutrition would be?
So thank you, Kieran. I think the important thing about nutrition is, what are you eating? Specifically, you should be eating a certain balance of carbohydrates and proteins and fats, and you should be drinking plenty of water. I think the next thing is, what's the size of the portion of the plate you have in front? And there's loads of references to that as to what you should be eating. I think the time of the day that you're eating is very popular at the moment. It's another one that's found itself, as you say, on the fads.
Intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting is the buzz phrase at the moment. Now, intermittent fasting is scientifically grounded. As Kieran says, it is actually evidence-based, with very strong evidence that if you eat your meals within 8 to 10 hour windows of a day, so you have 14 hours where you don't eat at all, that has huge impacts on your length of life, particularly in diabetic patients. And for that fat, it reduces the aging appearance. So that's of significant value to many individuals.
A large selling point.
Absolutely. And then I think the important thing about it, as it comes back to Kieran's point, is the motivation. And I mean, I think that, you know, the big challenge with nutrition is, are you prepared to make a change in the first place?
And that is very challenging. I feel sorry for people when they want to make changes, even if they're on board in their mind and they're because they are bombarded, I would suggest, with fad diets and with people selling a book or selling a package. If you sign up to my X, Y, and Z, you'll do well. And we hear everything from, fat is good now, sugar is the really bad thing, and those types of things. Can you sort of lead us through that a little bit? Certainly for many years we've associated high cholesterols with things like heart disease, but now there is a huge body of thought that thinks you should be putting butter in your coffee. Will you address that a little bit? Because people are definitely confused.
So I'm a practicing cardiologist. I see patients in this circumstance every single day of the week. And loads of them come in with information, we've tried this diet and that diet, and I don't need to do my cholesterol, and I don't need to do my eggs and my butter. And it ultimately comes back to what is proven to be good for your health. In the diet space at the moment, the two diets that stand out very strongly are diets that are based around whole food plant-based dieting, which is scientifically grounded in terms of heart disease, in terms of cancer prevention and treatment. The other diet that's very scientifically grounded is the Mediterranean diet, which is also shown to reduce the risks of cancer and heart disease. Beyond that, there are diets that are very good for lowering cholesterol. There's a diet called the portfolio diet, which is very good as a measure of a comparison of a statin versus taking the diet, which is very popular with many patients, obviously, who don't want to take statins. And there are many diets out there for treating things like high blood pressure. So there's a diet program called the DASH diet, which specifically looks at low dairy and low salt as a way of measuring blood pressure. None of the other diets that are there are actually scientifically or evidence-based in terms of specifically saying if you eat 10 eggs today and 5 tomorrow that your heart disease will improve. And the danger with all those types of diets that are appearing on the internet is that lots of people base their own opinions on what's on the internet. And really, when you're dealing with your health, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be consulting with the professionals who know what they're doing, whose practice is very much evidence-based.
What about the very low carb, very high protein diets that are hugely popular at the moment? What do you think of those?
So the danger with the very low carb, which is an attempt to lower your sugar, and the very high protein diets is that some of them also increase your fat. And so if you're a heart patient, that's the worst thing in the world. I think the same issues come up with patients' ability to tolerate just very low carb diets, patients who want to do paleos and keto diets because they think that they're popular and they're in. My own premise is that it's important for certain patients to lose weight. I think if they're relatively healthy beyond the weight and they can use these diets under supervision, it's absolutely fine. But you have to be aware that those diets do come with certain side effects. They do come with certain situations that you may not be able to tolerate it. And most importantly, if you have any health concern, even by virtue of your weight, you should really sit down and either talk to your GP about it or talk to somebody about me about it, rather than following on a claim on the internet that we need 50 volunteers to try this new diet. Yeah. We are not going to tell you what it's in and we're just going to show you all lose weight. That's a dangerous circumstance to be in.
Okay, Suzanne, let me bring you in. The whole notion of movement is medicine, I think, is gaining a lot of traction. There is good evidence behind that idea, isn't there?
Yeah, there is good evidence for certain aspects of it. So actually what we know most about is exercising at moderate to vigorous, which is where you're starting to get a little bit out of breath. We know much less about kind of light physical activity, which is, maybe pottering around the house, that type of activity. And we're starting to know a little bit more about sitting, but I would suggest we know actually probably very little about that. And I think, so people are banding around things like, sitting is the new smoking, for example.
Is sitting the new smoking?
Well, for a very specific subset of the population. So there was a big study that pulled together data for 1 million people, and what they showed was the people who sat for 8 hours and only did 5 minutes of activity a day, their risk of mortality was the same as someone who smoked.
Okay.
So they were a quarter of the group that they looked at.
But
so
that is quite a specific. I know lots of people are office workers, but they get up and go to the toilet or make a coffee or pop out for a sandwich or whatever.
So I think the message is that it's about breaking up your sitting during the day. If you are unable to break up your sitting during the day for whatever reason, say the nature of your job, the only way, or the evidence at the moment is saying the only way to offset that is 60 minutes of exercise in a day. And that's quite far away. I mean, only, just under 50% of the Irish population already meet the guideline of 150 minutes in a week. So that's 300 minutes in a week. So
if you were giving somebody advice on how much, I mean, I know it's a target to aim for, it's not like the maximum amount of exercise, but if you were saying, look, what is the basic? Is it half an hour a day? The idea, just, again, a bit like the area of nutrition, there's a huge amount of people in your space say 23 and a half hours a day is what you do, half an hour this, an hour there, and so much information is being thrown at people. If you could make it simple for people listening tonight, what would you say?
Well, I would say that you can package it any way you want. So the evidence suggests it's 150 minutes. You can do that in 1 or 2 sessions. You can do it in lots of small sessions during the day. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes. I think the important thing is to accumulate that movement during your day in whatever way works for you. Because the important thing is that you start doing it and you keep doing it. And I think people are very good at starting things, but not at keeping doing them.
And I hear what you're saying, so accumulate your minutes any kind of way you can, and just don't not accumulate them. But is there a best form of exercise for people? Is it walking? Is it swimming? Is it cycling? Or is there an ideal length of interval you'd spend ideally?
There isn't. There isn't an ideal interval. I think if you're very inactive, probably the best place to start is walking. And that's because if you're trying to build a habit, building it on something you can do and already do is a really good place to start. And we know that walking is safe for lots of people. So if you have a health condition and you're thinking about getting a bit more active, then I think walking is absolutely the place to start. But the most important thing is enjoy what you do. So if you don't enjoy walking, then don't walk. And don't go to the gym if you don't enjoy doing it.
Do something that you might sustain.
Absolutely, whatever that is.
Someone like yourself, what would you say? Because we are at that time of year, it's January, lots of people have been sold a new diet, but equally have been sold a new gym membership.
Yes.
And the boot camp thing is flying, and the detox teas are flying, and all of that stuff. Those kinds of quick hits, people want to fix the Christmas slump and the extra 10 pounds or 7 pounds that they're carrying from Christmas. Is it a good idea to do something in January, like a boot camp, to kickstart the year, or are you better to engage with exercise that you might be able to continue for not 6 weeks, but perhaps 6 months or even 6 years?
I think you need to find the thing you're going to be able to integrate in your day. I think that's the thing. I mean, Robert will probably have a view in this. I know if somebody's trying to lose weight, they probably do need to be doing a little bit more activity than maybe the guideline is suggesting. But I think the important thing is to find whatever that activity is that you're going to be able to stick with. And the mistake people make is they start too high. So, I mean, what I'd be saying to people is, many of us have our Fitbits or other devices.
Yes, we do.
Find out how much you're actually doing just pottering around in your day. If you're only doing, say, 3,000 steps, it doesn't make sense then to decide you're going to run a marathon, for example, because that's just far too big a jump.
And is that, one of the things you hear about people is the yo-yo diet or the yo-yo gym membership. You start something and that there's a psychology, I'm quite sure, behind this, Karen. You start something, but you overstretch, you overreach, and you fail, and you go back to zero. Is it a good idea to do the really rigid diet, the really hardcore boot camp? Kieran, are you setting yourself up for failure by sort of going from 0 to 60? Would you be better off going from 0 to 15 and sort of sticking with it?
I think absolutely. I mean, with any kind of change in behaviour, you want to set yourself up for achievement. So you're being positively reinforced by actually achieving small steps. But an awful lot of us set ourselves up for failure, so we go too hard at it, fail, and then the depression kind of sets in and the mental health thing, and then it's very hard to get back into that.
And is that negative feedback, the failing thing, is that part of his?
I think an awful lot of this is to do with our mental state, whether we're capable of taking on these kinds of changes, and I wonder if it's a particular thing here in Ireland for the Irish as such. There's a great saying by Yeats, he once said about a friend of his that, being Irish, his abiding sense of melancholy sustained him through temporary periods of joy, So I think it's very hard to take on these behavioural changes when one isn't feeling well psychologically. So I think mental well-being is kind of key to that. I think one of the quickest things that people can do there, and we've really, really good evidence for this now, big research evidence, is if you just write down every night before going to bed 3 good things that happened during the day and why, We know that that changes the way people sleep. We know that over a period of a number of weeks, that significantly increases people's sense of well-being. And I think starting there and then moving on to some of these physical challenges and nutritional challenges is a very good start. The other thing that people can do, which really makes a difference, and again, we have a lot of new research on this, is find out what their strengths are. And they can do that online. There's a really good site online in Cincinnati. It's called VIA. Very well validated questionnaire. So you can log in there, you do a detailed questionnaire, and it gives you a list of your 24 strengths in rank order. Now the evidence is that if you use your top 5 strengths, you know, every day, or recast your work, so you're using your strengths.
And what kind of, just for people listening, what
Things
kind
like
of strengths?
curiosity, kindness, gratitude, inquisitiveness, love of learning, those kinds of things. So we all have a number of strengths that we're really strong on. Finding out what those are and using those strengths, which feels natural, is a really quick way to develop good mental health. And I've seen this done. I mean, I was in Australia recently looking at this in schools for primary school children, you know, 7, 8, 9, being taught about their strengths. Now, we're starting to do that in education in Ireland, but only really starting. We need to start with children at 4 or 5 years of age.
So are you saying if for example, you went on and you found your strength, what your main strength was kindness, so if you embraced that and were kind to people and kind of conscious of being kind, you'd start to feel good about yourself. Is that the kind of feedback loop?
It feels normal, Ciara, to use a strength, one, but the more you're using a strength that really fits you, the better you feel. And the research on this is really, really solid, you know. Take your top 5, don't worry about the ones that you're really low on. You know,
but it has a huge affirmation effect on whether you will succeed in losing weight,
it does.
taking on behaviour change. I mean,
it does,
the other comment I think is, if you have a great day and one bad thing happens to you out of 10, the thing you remember in your day is the one bad thing. It's not the 9 great things that happen to you. And so, you know, I think the same challenge with losing weight. You know, if you have a bad thing, one of the tricks of trying to sustain weight loss is to forgive yourself. You can have a bad day. You might have a bar of chocolate, but then the next day you have to start off where you left it the day before, which was on that journey of trying to improve yourself by a small degree every single day. Just keep at it, because you'll get there that way.
And we do need to kind of focus on our achievements, don't we, rather than I've actually, we were talking about the Fitbit, I changed my Fitbit from 10,000 steps, which is what its default setting is to 9, right? Yeah. And the reason I did is not because I hardly ever get to the 10. I do, but I dislike when I don't get to the 10, and it makes me grumpy and it puts me off. I hit the 9 pretty much day in, day out. And I feel good about that.
High achiever.
And you see, low expectations, high achievement. It's all very good.
There's a really, really good book, I'm sure you know, Robert and Suzanne, by Roy Baumeister, called Bad is Stronger Than Good. And basically what we're saying is human beings are orientated to pay more attention to negative things than to positive things. And there's an evolutionary basis to that. The negative thing might have killed you, you know, or the positive thing you discount. So one of the reasons for getting people to think at night before they go to bed about the 3 good things, one of the reasons for that is it sets that process in the opposite direction. So you're now focusing on the good things, not just thinking, as Robert says, about the bad things that happen during the day.
Robert, if I could ask you to sort of highlight, if you were going to boil down, you're, you know, obviously an expert in lifestyle medicine, and people are very interested in this area, and I think this conversation is actually very important, because we're kind of claiming back the area of lifestyle medicine, perhaps from people who talk about it a lot but aren't giving the right kinds of information. If there was about 5 big hitters that people should be trying to do to achieve a healthy lifestyle, what would they be?
Well, I think, just as we were saying, you have to have the right attitude. You really have to define in your own life what you want out of life and what you want to achieve. Do you want to kind of be around, live long, which is what most people want if you actually tease it out of them. And if you want to do that, unfortunately, you have to be healthy. There isn't any way to get it. There's the odd outlier. But the reality is you can't be smoking cigarettes. You don't have to stop drinking altogether, but there is a recommendation of about 10 to 12 units, which is 6 pints of beer or 10 glasses of wine in a week. You need to take a level of physical activity. As Suzanne said, that's 150 minutes a week at a minimum. The more you do, the better it is for you. You need to take charge of what you're eating, whether it's the amount of food, the type of food, whether you like to do the fasting because it keeps you interested, but ultimately what's on your plate is important in how much you're eating. And that does extend the whole way through life, from parents to children to the very ends of life. I think the other portion of it is that stress, as we also just mentioned, is a massive factor of risk for illness and for disease and for premature death at the moment. I see a huge amount of patients that are suffering from stress at work that's contributing to heart disease. And the other major factor which is evolving is poor sleeping habits. So, sleep, which a lot of people may not realize, is that if you sleep under 5 hours every night, you increase your risk for heart disease by 20%.
Okay.
But if you sleep for 9 hours plus every night, you increase your risk for heart disease to 35%. So there is a level in
There's a happy
between.
medium.
There is a happy medium, but I think a lot of the factors, and lifestyle medicine is very attractive to this, because lifestyle medicine encompasses all of these risk factors. And the reality is you get people, for example, who are very stressed at work and find it very difficult to cope. So you spend extra hours at work, so you give up the gym. You don't do any exercise. You've missed dinner, so you snack on what's available in the office. You go home, you are still doing work. You go to bed late, you eat your dinner late, you've got a huge amount of meetings, they're all in your head. You lie down in the bed, you can't go to sleep, you're up, so you're on about 2 hours sleep. Some people work for big American companies, they're working at 3 o'clock in the morning, so there's no sleep at all. Other people comfort themselves between food, between drinking alcohol, between smoking cigarettes late at night. So everything just cascades together into the perfect storm for a health problem.
It does. But what you've mentioned there really are the old big hitters. Don't smoke, don't drink too much, keep active, eat a healthy diet, try and limit your stress and try and get enough sleep. It's not rocket science.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet, Suzanne, we have a population that's becoming heavier every year. We're, obese, a huge number of us. We're sedentary. The rules for a healthy living are simple, and yet we're failing to achieve them. Is it all down to balance? Because when you talk about sleeping too much is almost as bad as sleeping too little, or and obviously starving yourself and eating too little is also not particularly good for health. Is balance hard to achieve, do you think, Suzanne, in all these things?
Well, I think we've talked a lot about the individual factors, but I think there are other factors, so like the environmental factors, how our buildings are designed. So you can say to somebody, and I've experienced this a lot recently, take the stairs instead of taking the lift, but then you can't find the stairs. There's a lot of buildings where it's really hard to find the stairs. So the thing is, if it's already hard for you and then it's made harder, then it becomes really difficult. And then I think also it's also about what everybody else is doing. So I think now, I have to say, I've recently moved to Dublin, and it's great because I'm commuting. It's actually a bonus. I'm getting my 30 minutes of walking in really relatively easily, and lots of other people are doing that too. But if you live in a rural community, and we're doing work at the moment in a rural community, there aren't lights, there aren't footpaths. If
There's
it
no
rains,
public transport, you have to get in your
that's
car.
it. There's nowhere to, so we'd often say to people, if it starts raining, go and walk around the shopping centre. It's really difficult for some people to actually enact, even though they want to do it and they know what it is.
Professor Donald O'Shea says we live in an obesogenic environment. Do you think that's true? Do you think that society in general is conspiring to make us maybe a bit more sedentary than we would have been in previous generations, maybe eat a bit more processed food than we would? A lot of it's coming down to time pressure and convenience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, Robert, what your view is, but this big analysis that they did, they separated out sitting at work versus sitting in the evening. And sitting in the evening seemed to increase your risk because they think it's maybe associated with your eating behaviours or the fact that you sit after having a big meal, and that actually you need to be doing movement at that time of the evening. So I think there's, the way we live our lives now, we're really making it very difficult for us to be healthy.
And some of that is down to organisations. I was coming in the other day and I was just looking at everybody racing in at 8:30 to be in a box and sit in that box for 8 hours on a laptop doing work that they could just as easily be doing at home and do the same whole thing the same. So you're absolutely right. It's not just about individuals, it's about the nature of how we design environments and particularly how we design work. I mean, most people, many people now sit working on laptops, and I think that's something we really have to start paying attention to, I think organisations are starting to think long and hard now about sort of wellness is a kind of a difficult term because it can get out to being a bit flaky, but the genuine notion that how do you create a workplace where people can flourish, that they're not just getting by at work and doing well, but they're actually flourishing. There are very few organisations that could say their people are flourishing.
Do you guys though think, because we're talking in medicine and in evidence-based circles about, we don't want to look at things like illness, we want to look at things like wellness, but you yourself identified that there is a sort of a slight association between wellness and being slightly flaky. Do we need, as professionals in healthcare, to reclaim wellness from people perhaps who are selling something to do with wellness, but maybe aren't really invested in wellness the way the likes of you guys around this table
I
are.
might, Kieran, just add. So lifestyle medicine is the practice of medicine that's evidence-based. It's delivered by doctors, very specifically, and it incorporates the idea that you can prevent disease, which we've known that for decades, but you can also treat disease, and you can potentially reverse disease by virtue of changing the pillars that we mentioned, the smoking, the drinking, the exercise, the sleep, the stress, and the physical activity. The other thing that it really empowers is that the doctor leads by example. So the doctors look after themselves. And if the doctors look after themselves and practice what they preach, believe it or not, the vast majority of patients will follow what the doctor's example is.
So we need to not just do what I say, do what I do.
Absolutely, Ciara.
We're coming to the end of this discussion. We've talked about, and a lot of this is down to what an individual can do for themselves, and that is very empowering. But we've also talked about the real sort of situation where we do live in a world where there's time pressures, and it is something of an obesogenic environment for people, and there's lots of things conspiring to be obstacles in our way. If you could, any of you or all of you, suggest something that policymakers could do, what do you think needs to change at that level? Is it to do with delivering education programs? Is it to do with having more supports for dietitians in the community or doctors in the community? How do we actually, as a society, tackle this as well as individuals?
Well, I'm going to speak from the physiotherapy point of view, because I feel we're 30% lower than the European average for physiotherapists in Ireland. If you look at the recent data for Healthy Ireland, most people are actually going to private practice, and it's the younger people who are going for physiotherapy, where actually it's probably our ageing population who needs support. And when we talk about the guidelines, I think there's a risk. 150 minutes is very far away from where some clinical populations are. There's a risk of switching them off because they go, what's the point? I'm never going to be able to do that. And I think they do need support. Now, I think, doctors are probably under pressure in terms of time, and physiotherapists have a little bit more time. So I think we can play a really key role in really trying to support people who want to change, but just aren't quite sure where to start.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I agree. I think a lot of, say, cardiology is a good example where we've moved as a specialty to work closer with other stakeholders in a team approach. So I think within the medical fraternity, the doctors working with the physios, working with the nutritionists, the psychologists, and I think doctors need to learn some additional skills. I think we need to learn how to coach patients, because ultimately, as we said at the beginning, we can't turn around to the patient and say, you must do this because, or else this is going to happen to you, because nobody follows that instruction. So I think if we could change the way we do things, we'd go a lot further in terms of at least trying to improve the situation.
Absolutely.
For me, in terms of policy, I think our education system is absolutely key. The sooner we start with children, now the teachers will say, of course, we're loading everything onto the teachers and onto the schools, but really the evidence is there that you can achieve an enormous amount by starting with children when they're very young, in terms of helping them to develop their physical health, school policies, in terms of their psychological health and well-being, and that really needs resourcing. I mean, the Department of Education has a well-being program that's being rolled out, but the resources, I don't think really the schools would say are not being put into it.
I agree, and there is a value in getting at kids young with all this.
You can scale that.
Thank you so much, Professor Ciara O'Boyle, Professor Suzanne McDonough, and Professor Robert Kelly. Thank you very much for that very informative conversation.